Welcome everyone. My name is Tim Byun. I serve as the CEO of OKCoin USA Inc. As you can see, our office is relatively new. We've turned on our platform 8 months ago. And so there's 20 strong OKCoin colleagues. I first want to acknowledge them, because without them, we wouldn't have tonight. So maybe you could all raise your hand real quick. There's 20 of us. All right. Just a quick note on the 20. I'm very fortunate that, as you may know, OKCoin started in Beijing, China in 2013. And I don't speak Chinese. So it's very difficult for me, but we have highly competent, talented, bilingual, trilingual colleagues. And we make it happen by working with our head office in Beijing. We also have an office in Hong Kong that we opened up in 2014 to serve a US dollar market, in addition to 2013 with the RMB. We'll fast forward, you know what happened with the RMB. The domestic exchange was closed in 2017 via a tap on the shoulder by the PBOC. But we are strong in working our US dollar exchange. And so if you have not signed up on okcoin.com, please do so. All right, my last plug of okcoin.com. I want to open up this evening by sharing that we have an excellent topic, excellent speakers, and it's actually going to be a great learning environment for all of us. You know, today's market reminds me of 2014. Back then, it was a rough drought, and it was actually pretty long. And so I think we're kind of witnessing similar time periods, but this is where, you know, it's a little quieter. This is where we should do our homework. This is where OKCoin should make our platform better. And so that's what we're focusing on. And tonight, it's all about Decred. I want to introduce Jake, founder of Decred.
Thank you, Tim. Hi, everybody. My name is Jake Yocom-Piatt. I've been doing Bitcoin stuff and working on Decred since 2013. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Decred works and hopefully teach you something maybe that you didn't know or maybe that you did know. And I'll go and retread it, and you'll be surprised at what you might have learned. So who am I? I've been working in the crypto space since early 2013. I've financed, directed, and managed the build-out of BTC Suite, which is an alternative full-node Bitcoin implementation, which met with some disdain from people in the Bitcoin community. Some people really liked it, but you know, I was just trying to contribute. And I'm the Decred project lead. Decred was sort of an iteration on Bitcoin. We experienced certain things in the Bitcoin space, and we thought, wow, you know, we can do better than this. So we figured we'd iterate it and give it a go ourselves. I am the CEO of Company Zero. Company Zero is one of the major contractors for the Decred project. We build out the core infrastructure, add consensus changes, keep the wallet humming, keep the network going. And in some ways it's thankless work, but it's exciting for us. It keeps me busy and out of trouble. So what is Decred? Decred is effectively Bitcoin with a proof-of-stake governance layer. The proof-of-stake governance layer has been added to address what we saw as a crisis of governance in the context of Bitcoin. As most of you are likely aware, there was the SegWit change set and the fork that led to Bitcoin Cash, and that was a serious crisis in governance in the sense that there was a basic decision to be made. Do we implement SegWit or not? And that decision took, what, on the order of 3 years to make? And that, to me, that really sort of obviated a very serious problem. Making difficult decisions is something that has to happen episodically with any kind of complex project where you have a lot of people working together and you're building out infrastructure. So what we're trying to do with Decred is we're trying to iterate on what we saw as something great, which is Bitcoin, and make it so that it kept humming and it kept working a little bit more smoothly by merit of resolving disputes in a sane way. If I had to describe what Bitcoin is in a single clause, it would be gamification of timestamping. That is, that you are taking timestamps and you are turning that process into a game. Every pure proof-of-work cryptocurrency does exactly this. The mining process is a game. Everyone competes, and then someone wins, and then you move on to the next iteration of the game. This process is great because it removes a single point of control. Normally, somebody needs to time order transactions in a financial system in order to prevent people from double spending. And this removes the need for that trusted third party. This also acts as a decentralization mechanism, just to be explicit. So what have we done with Decred? Decred takes this working decentralization mechanism, the proof of work, the proof of work, and then iterates on top of it and goes, we're going to hybridize proof of work and proof of stake. We're going to take something that works, proof of work, and then we're going to add to it something that is probably the next least complex thing that we can come up with as a governance mechanism. With proof of work, it's a question of who shows up with some special computing power and how much of it do they have. The next thing to ask is, well, who holds how many coins in this system? As you're all likely aware, there are certain people in the Bitcoin space who hold an enormous number of coins and are very upset about various decisions made by the Bitcoin ecosystem. And we feel that there needs to be a balance between proof of work and the people who hold the coins. So in order to accomplish this, we have to gamify the decision-making process. And the way we do that is using this proof of stake layer. It's an opt-in system, and it's designed to align the incentives of the people who are in control of the, of the currency, the stakeholders, the people who actually own the coins, align their interests with the decisions that are made by the network. And the idea here is that it became very clear with pure proof-of-work cryptocurrencies, primarily with Bitcoin, that those interests were not very well aligned. That is, that there are people who make large amounts of ASICs, and the people who make those large amounts of ASICs may not even have any Bitcoin, but they have an enormous amount of sovereignty in the system. And we felt that we had to sort of right the ship in order to fix that. I'm going to discuss the motivation for these changes. The motivation for these changes is, I've sort of touched on it in a couple places, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. Another way of viewing pure proof of work is that you have a single group of people, the proof of work miners, who have a monopoly on access to, or on write access to the ledger. So we have this ledger, it's full of blocks, but if I want to write to the ledger let's say I held 1 million Bitcoin, I can't write to the ledger. I need these special computer circuits in order to write to the ledger. That monopoly pushes people out, and it makes it so that it's very difficult to exert any sovereignty if you are not a proof of work miner. So how do we solve this? We create proof of stake miners. Proof of stake miners are people who can vote on these various problems that show up. And if we look to Bitcoin or other proof of work cryptocurrencies as an example, what we see is that the biggest decision that people argue about is consensus changes. Should we change this rule? Should we increase the block size? Should we add SegWit? Should we add, check lock time verify, and so on? These decisions are really big, and without a consistent set of rules that we all share, it's pretty much impossible to have a working cryptocurrency. So these questions of who gets to make the decision about changing the rules, these things really matter. This is a big deal. And what we did is that we created a system where you can opt in, very similar to proof of work, where maybe you have some special circuits and you don't want to show up and do proof of work. Yeah, you can do that with Bitcoin too. But in our context, if you have coins and you want to be participating in the governance system, you're welcome to show up and do that. And it takes away some sovereignty from people like myself, developers, and also proof of work miners. And the idea is that if the people who hold the coins in the network, which are similar to, say, Class A voting shares in a corporation, if the people who hold these shares don't want something to happen, it really does beg the question, should this actually happen in the first place? And we subscribe strongly to that position and believe it should not. In order to avoid a tragedy of the commons, which was one of the other things that we experienced with Bitcoin, which was I was paying to develop BTC Suite and making zero money, and that was a unsustainable position to be in for more than maybe a couple years. So I pretty rapidly saw firsthand, wow, this is fun, but I'm losing a lot of money. So how do we right the ship on that front? And the way we go about doing that is we take 10% of every block, and we take 10% of every block, and then that goes to a development organization. We started out with this development organization being a centralized corporate entity as a stopgap, and that will be changing in the near future. We're going to be putting forward a proposal about that in the next little bit. Many birds with one stone. One thing that you can take away from looking at Bitcoin is that it solves many problems in a single stroke. And the single stroke was, by gamifying timestamping, we end up with solving a whole bunch of other problems, right? You gamify timestamping, there's your issuance mechanism, there's your censorship resistance. All of these things are sort of tied together. In 2013, Adam McKenzie wrote the original white paper for MC2, or Memcoin 2. Now, Memcoin 2 was what ultimately became Decred. And this is where this model, where you take coins, you lock a certain number of them, and then they go and then you get a ticket. That ticket goes into a rolling lottery, and then every block, 5 of these tickets are called. And if your ticket's called, you get to vote. And if you vote, you get a reward. This is very similar to the model used for proof of work. In the case of proof of work, it's a sortition on people who control these special circuits. In this case, it's a sortition on people who control the actual coins themselves. There's a number of major problems that got solved in one go here. By creating this rolling lottery, I'm sure it might be too small for you guys to read, but apologies. By gamifying this and turning it into a rolling lottery, we end up with a means of someone proving that they've sacrificed something to participate in the governance system. By locking these coins for staking, you are foregoing liquidity for the period where these coins are locked. So you can't go to the casino, exchange. I joke. I forgot I was at an exchange. Everyone here is very nice, of course. Unless you're cheating. Okay, jokes aside. Every time you vote, you get paid. I think a lot more people in the United States would be voting if they were paid to vote. Even though I think some people are paid to vote. I don't know. I don't know. Depends on what you mean by paid. Yeah. It's called lobbying. So you can also have the opportunity to create what are roughly semi-passive returns. And I say semi-passive returns because you can't just sit and, if you have 1,000 Decred, you can't just sit and then just accumulate Decred. You actually need to do something. You need to participate in the staking system, and you need to forego, your near-term liquidity on the coins that are staked. Further, what we have is our proof of stake layer overrides proof of work. And the way it does this is that there's a vote bit on every block that applies to the validity of the prior block's proof of work. So if enough stakeholders vote no on block n+1, it strips the proof of work reward from block n. So that's a very sharp stick with which you can poke a proof of work miner who is misbehaving, just in the just in the hypothetical case that they do that. We have not yet had to poke anyone with the sharp stick, but the sharp stick is there to remind people that they should behave. If you're familiar with consensus code, you might be familiar with this image. People get really passionate about it. People get very upset about it. Religions are created over stuff like this. And we feel that consensus code is really the magic that makes cryptocurrencies work. If we don't all have a shared set of rules that we agree to, we can't create a coherent blockchain. If half the room thinks one block is valid and half the room thinks it isn't, then we've got a fork, and now it becomes a question mark of, well, which one of these is correct? Which one is double spending? What's going on here? It's a serious problem. So instead of viewing it as something that can't be changed or shouldn't be changed, our view is that this stuff should be changed, albeit very carefully. You shouldn't be, throwing darts at a board and making decisions based on what number you hit. And you also shouldn't be, throwing papers down a flight of stairs in an effort to make decisions. So making these decisions and changing consensus it's a big deal, and it needs to be done very, very carefully, or else you are going to cause yourself lots of pain. You have to take these exceptional measures. In order to do this right, you need test coverage, backwards and forwards usually. So you need to test that things fail correctly. You need to make sure that the positive path is proper. The amount of work that goes into changing consensus in a safe way is pretty serious, as anyone who has touched code like this can testify. It's also something that can really divide your community. And we've made an effort with Decred to do this in a way that doesn't divide the community. I won't have time to get into the deep details of how that works, but we'll touch on it. If anyone here is familiar with the movie RoboCop, I'm a huge fan. I love the movie. And during the movie, there's a battle, which is this police officer who's been shot and killed is resurrected as a machine, and he has a serious conflict internally. Is he a machine? Is he a man? And he flops back and forth, and he has dreams, and he can't tell which one he really is. So in a way, it's a metaphor for proof of work, proof of stake. Proof of work is sort of the machine side, and proof of stake is the human side. The way it works is that you opt in, and then there's the rolling lottery. So there's a ticket pool. The ticket pool has a target size, similar to how proof of work has a target block time. The target block time, say in Bitcoin, is 10 minutes. So every one of these adjustment intervals, there will be a tally done to be how many minutes have passed from the start of the last interval versus what's our target, and that will be used to scale the difficulty. Whereas what we do here is we use a fixed ticket pool size as the target. So the target size was 40,960 tickets, and we chose 40,000 just because it didn't create like a whopping database. It wasn't too slow, it wasn't too fast. We figured it was enough tickets. Some people might not feel that way because tickets are expensive now. They're like 110 Decred, so I don't know, it's like, $1,700 or something to participate in our staking system, to buy a ticket. You can do ticket splitting, but that's a whole nother slide, and I don't have a slide for that. And the way it works is that every ticket has five tickets pulled to vote. 30% of every block goes to proof of stake, so that means each person voting gets 5% of each block subsidy that they vote on. And the difficulty here changes every 12 hours, so that if the ticket pool size goes up, then the ticket price goes up, which drives the ticket pool size down. And that process allows us to establish an equilibrium. And if you look at the ticket pool size as a function of time, it's actually been relatively stable for quite some time. Each block subsidy is split three ways. The 60% to proof of work, 30% to proof of stake, and 10% to the development organization. The way we got to these numbers is we kind of backed into it. My argument is that if you can't do it with 10%, you probably shouldn't be doing it, and that's kind of my comment on taxes. You can dial taxes all the way up to 90%, but it starts to beg the question: should you really be doing this? And so if you can't do it with 10%, probably shouldn't be doing it. So we set that at 10%, And then we're left with 90% left. And what the way we got to 60% proof of work and 30% proof of stake is that 60% proof of work is because the equipment's expensive. You got to pay to run it. There's real world costs. And the 30% proof of stake was done because if you have more than 30% proof of stake reward, the rewards for a semi-passive act become absurdly high. So as much as I think there could have been something cool if we did more proof of stake, we didn't want to make the returns comically large and then just get a bunch of people who rent-seeked on the staking process. And per my comments earlier, the first vote bit on any ticket addresses the validity of the prior block's proof of work. If you want to punish proof of work miners, every block has a vote bit for this. And this is the sharp stick I was referring to. And the way the rest of our sovereignty system works is there's additional vote bits. So, let's say we want to make consensus change A. There's the first vote bit that applies to the prior blocks, and then there's a vote bit for agenda A, which is, to make some consensus change. And that's how our voting process works, is there's periods where these votes are tallied and periods where there's an upgrade going on and so on. I'll talk about Politeia for a minute. Politeia is our off-chain governance system, and the reason we created this is that consensus changes are very, very big. They're a big deal. You need to make this stuff on chain in order to prevent people from gaming them. But when it comes to all the other decision-making processes, you can go ahead and do a lot of this stuff off-chain. It's sufficient to do this off-chain. So rather than clutter the chain with this information, we created a system which is roughly... we didn't want to just create a website where it's like, oh, trust us, we're operating this website. And if you're at all familiar with the cryptocurrency space, some people censor the hell out of their subreddits. So we didn't want to just do it on Reddit. We didn't want to do it on a website. We wanted to create like an indelible record that you can't go back and change, and that's Politeia. So it is data that is anchored in our blockchain using the timestamps from our blockchain. And it serves to allow us to prove who said what when cryptographically, as opposed to relying on, good old Jake to sign transactions or something like that. And it is a general solution. Anyone here who wants to use a system like this could modify Politeia to work on their blockchain and, use it for their own governance. I'll keep the technical summary very, very short. There is a chain of hashes, or you can take the files, put them in a Merkle tree, as you can see on the image, and then you can create a Merkle path down to a Merkle root. The Merkle root gets anchored episodically into the blockchain via an op return, and that allows you to prove that a particular file existed on or before a given date. And if you're familiar with Open Timestamps, which is a Peter Todd project, if I'm not mistaken, it's sort of an iteration on that, except that the timestamps are independently verifiable. So technical summary here for this is, if you're familiar with Git, we take Git, and then you take the data in Git, and episodically you take a commit hash from Git and you anchor it into the blockchain. So this, and you also add an identity layer. This allows you to say who did what when. This can be integrated in all kinds of contexts. It's essentially free. You don't have to pay anything for this if you don't want to. We like to give stuff away, so this is us giving away technology. And there are users, administrators, proposals, and is it public? That's really all you need to do to integrate it. And the voting on Politeia is based on a snapshot of our ticket pool. This ticket pool of roughly 41,000 tickets. You take a snapshot, people vote on it, and that's how you can determine whether something passes or doesn't pass as a Politeia proposal. And this allows for quick assessment of stakeholder sentiment. So instead of, say a multi-month process for a consensus change, you're more on a multi-week process for a proposal and funding and all of that. And then the snap voting uses the commitment address on tickets so that nobody can raid a data center and steal all of your sovereignty. And that's pretty much it. That's all I got time for. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jake. I just got a nod from our marketing department that I could share a little about this, but Decred is going to be making an announcement tomorrow, 6 a.m. I would encourage all of you to look that up. It is their announcement. I think it's going to be exciting. For us, as you know, we are an exchange. We are a fiat to token exchange. What that means is you could send US dollars from your US bank account to our major US bank accounts. And so we also have an announcement. Thursday, 7 p.m., we will be listing Decred on our exchange. And so I welcome you. So I welcome you to please check us out, get ready, sign up. It's not easy. We're regulated. We have a full-blown KYC process, know your customer. So we ask everything, including your medical records. Just kidding. But it is a full bona fide, full KYC. And so please look us up. I want to also introduce our next speakers. I'll just introduce my colleague, Alex Feinberg. A little known, interesting history of Alex, professional baseball player, professional dancer, especially at a Chinese New Year skit routine. You can ask him later about that. But more importantly, no, we don't want him performing tonight. More importantly, he spearheaded our launch of our premier program. It's for sophisticated traders, entities, as well as individuals. We are providing dedicated liaisons to you sophisticated traders. And so it's a great program. More details on our website, but it provides fast fiat settlement, as well as I mentioned, tailored individual service, and probably the lowest fees. But Alex would know best. But please welcome Alex Feinberg.
Thank you, Tim. Professional dancer contingent on payment, I suppose. Thanks for having me up. As Tim mentioned, we are rolling out the Premier program. Feel free to grab me after the discussion if you'd like to hear more. But essentially, we're friends with everyone in the community. We want to make ourselves accessible. And for professional traders or sophisticated traders who have the capacity to trade maybe a little bit above what most individuals might trade, we want to make sure that you guys always have a line of communication to us. Want to make sure that you're always able to deposit and withdraw funds. And if there's any issues, you can pick up the phone and call us or email us. And we want to be competitive in any way we can, which obviously does include fees. But I'm sure you came to hear from more than just us. And so, Chris and Alex, why don't you come up? From Placeholder Venture Capital, some of the early folks in the space, I will let them introduce themselves, and then we can get to talking.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm a researcher at Placeholder.
And I'm Chris, and I'm a partner at Placeholder.
I feel like you could tell folks a little bit more about your prominence in the space. That's a little bit short, I would say.
Well, go ahead. So Placeholder is a venture capital firm in New York that is focused exclusively on crypto, and to this point, exclusively through the native assets of the networks that we work with, though that may change. Our focus very much to date has been on governance, and we've stayed relatively disciplined in investing in a series of assets and networks that we believe will be differentiated on the basis of governance.
And what were you doing before Placeholder?
I was at a corporate venture capital fund called Lowe's Ventures.
So Alex gave the intro on Placeholder. I guess a little bit on my background. I got my professional start in the industry at a firm called ARK Investment Management. ARK in 2015 became the first public fund manager to invest in Bitcoin. I later published a book in the space that some of you may know called Crypto Assets, and then have founded Placeholder with Joel Monegro and Brad Burnham. And Alex is one of our earliest employees.
Great. So, given everybody's here to chat Decred, maybe you can give us a little bit of background, why you saw it was a good investment, what your favorite aspects of the project are.
Sure. So I went down the Decred rabbit hole when I was still at ARC, so pre-Placeholder. It was first Willy Woo, who some of you may know from Twitter, who was poking me on it, and then Charlie Lee tweeted about it at some point in 2016. He tweeted a list of assets that he thought had real utility and differentiation, and it was Bitcoin, of course, Litecoin, Monero, and then Decred. I forget what the fifth was, but the combination of Willie and Charlie got me to look more closely. I think one of my first realizations was the quality of the team. Jake underplayed it a little bit, but the BTC suite, which was an alternative full node implementation of Bitcoin Core, was written in Golang. On all accounts, it was as quality an implementation as Bitcoin Core was. And realizing that here was a Bitcoin Crade development team that had chosen to leave to build something that they felt improved upon Bitcoin was compelling. That has since evolved into, say, a more formal thesis where we think of Bitcoin as being hypersecure, adaptable, and sustainable. So the combo of proof of work, proof of stake actually makes it on a on-par basis more expensive to attack than proof of work alone. In terms of the adaptability, every network has to make decisions. It's just a matter of how you go about making those decisions. And Decred has put in place a framework to allow a decentralized set of actors to efficiently make decisions. And that allows it to evolve and adapt in an efficient manner. And then the sustainable aspect is Decred's treasury currently has 600,000 units of DCR. At current market prices, that's a $10 million treasury, but of course very dependent upon the price of Decred. But what I really like and what I really liked when I was first going deep on Decred was there was no ICO, there was no exogenous injection of capital. What the Decred team did to capitalize themselves is they did an initial airdrop, 4% to whoever signed up, and then 4% to their treasury, which then allowed them to fund operations combined with the goodwill of Company Zero to start. But then from there, the entire capitalization of the network has been based on capital appreciation of DCR itself. So there was never any investment that was taken in. It's all grown out of the utility of the network being reflected in the price of the asset and therefore capitalizing the operations of the network.
So from my perspective, I don't think I was following Charles. I think I missed the memo on Decred at some point in 2017. But I got to know Chris, and then I was interviewing at Placeholder. And the challenge that was given to me was, why don't you look into a network and let us know what you think of it? And we actually have an idea for what that might be. So why don't you look at Decred? And I really hadn't heard much about Decred at the time. And I also, you didn't tell me that you guys held Decred. So I could have gotten that one very wrong, and I probably wouldn't be here today, though.
You would
presumably,
still be here.
presumably there'd be some objectiveness to that if I came out super bearish on Decred. But what really caught my eye is I decided the way I decided to go with that was to look at what was going on in the Decred network, what was going on in terms of the ticket pool and ticket activity on the proof of stake side, what was going on with miners. And then what was going on across the ecosystem. And really there were a few things that really stood out. About 40% of supply of Decred was locked in proof of stake, and there was significant engagement on both the governance and the voting on the protocol. Decred had implemented the prior year a change in their essentially their proof of stake difficulty algorithm that prices tickets at every block. And Jake didn't go into this in a lot of depth, but the upshot was it was extremely volatile. Ticket prices were very volatile, and the community really stepped up in a very big way to change that, and that was pretty impressive. And so I looked at that, and then at that point there was sort of rumors about ASICs coming online, and I think hash rate had like doubled or something, and looked set to like explode, which it did ultimately, going up something like 100x or something.
100x in the last year.
So just looking at it objectively, I came out of it, and then I got on a call with Chris, and he's like, well, you didn't tell me if you're bullish or not, because I tried to sidestep the question, but I said, well, I came out pretty excited about it. And then I realized that the sort of Placeholder had accumulated a position in DCR. So I was glad I was able to research it sort of from an objective standpoint, I thought, and then sort of align and come to my own conviction on the asset. So that was exciting to me, and that's how I came to appreciate Decred.
Well, you shared a little bit about the network and spoke a little bit about the ecosystem in 2017, 2018. Looking forward, next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, how do you see the crypto ecosystem broadly evolving, and what place would you see Decred having in that?
Hard question. I think that, for us right now, we're focused on developer tools and networks, and then for the, say, mainstream use cases, those being financial. Really, blockchains are natively financial technology that collapse the cost of asset creation, custody, and transfer. And I would argue that a lot of the, say, more technology-geared crypto networks, their success is contingent upon us nailing the financial components and making this just much easier for users to onboard and use. And so I'd like to think that, well, hopefully our investment focus will dovetail with where we're seeing real traction. Where does Decred fit within that? I think Decred has one of the most elegantly constructed supply sides in the whole industry, where it's taking into account the hardware that performs consensus through proof of work, the stakeholders that make decisions, and then also the code creators, which I consider a form of supply-sider. And it is compensating all of those supply-siders. And it's constructed a elegant system of checks and balances to make sure that no single supply-sider can run away with the keys to the network and the control to the network. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that model. And generally, when I have conversations with engineers and explain Decred's supply side, they'll get excited and go and take learnings from it. Jake mentioned that Politeia can easily be ported onto another blockchain. Potentially, it gets extended through Decred itself, and Decred becomes a governance chain where people are anchoring their voting, money, and transparency decisions all through Decred. So I think it's more of an open slate in terms of how Decred may work in.
Yeah. So from our perspective, a lot of what we end up thinking about and talking about internally, obviously we're a venture capital fund, so we think on 10-year horizons typically, and so that's very much how we think about the assets in our portfolio, and very much what drives us to this idea of governance as a differentiator. And so for me, that's where Decred comes in that I don't think standing here in 2018 we can pre-specify all the features or all the community aspects that will make a network like Decred successful. Really what we can do is we can specify the processes through which we can arrive at the right answers when those become apparent to us. So those things could be surrounding privacy, they could be surrounding how networks promote themselves, they could be any number of things. Really what we can do is specify the ways through which as a community we come together and decide on those things in a way that doesn't leave us kind of in the situation that Jake described, where we're simultaneously debating on what the right answer should be, and then also debating on what process we should use to arrive at the answer. Because of course, right, in that situation, let's say miners and stakers or miners and wallets disagree on how you should make a decision, right? Miners will say, well, no, just leave the decision to whoever has the most hash power. Wallets, potentially exchanges will say, leave the decision to whoever custodies the most coins at any given time, right? So we can't be having those debates. We need to specify the ways in which we're going to reach decisions a priori. And so I think that's something that's incredibly differentiating for Decred, in that they've created incredible clarity around how the community will resolve disputes in the future. And then the other thing that comes to the 10-year thesis for Decred is the way that they've specified the ability of the protocol to be to be sustainable. So what happens to a lot of the protocol teams once the money runs out, right? Do we end up in a situation like what Jake described, where he's building a full node implementation, an alternative full node implementation for Bitcoin and not getting compensated? Or do we have mechanisms for those teams to sustainably fund themselves as they do so? So those are the things that I think really will differentiate Decred beyond the 24-month period and into the decades to come.
So Alex, you touched on dispute resolution. Recently in October 2018, there was a change made to give stakeholders control of the Decred treasury. How would you see that playing out? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages that you would see based on that decision?
So we think it's a brilliant experiment in the way crypto networks govern themselves, and I think it goes to this idea of sustainability. That we specified a process where if we want, let's say to hire a PR firm to get the word out about the asset, like how do we decide that as a community, right? Like what does it mean for like a crypto network to have a PR firm, right? Like this is like completely uncharted territory. So we think that there's advantages to the clarity in that process, the way Decred has specified Politeia, so that we have sort of an open process through which we debate things and keep people accountable, right? If you said something at some time, it will be timestamped on Decred, and then you won't be able to go back and say, well, I didn't say that, right? The way that the system engenders accountability, I think, is one of its real advantages. In the long run, we're going to have to figure out a number of things, and I think it's going to be an interesting experiment. We very much look forward as a holder of Decred to participating in that process and helping the community arrive at those answers.
We do participate.
We do. That's right.
I want to emphasize the point of accountability because what's great with Politeia is there's a ledger for all conversations and all decision making that is immutable. And if you enter, say, the crypto space in 2019, there's a lot of revisionist history that happened in the years past, which is hard to see and keep track of with a lot of different networks if they don't have some immutable record to keep track of how decisions were made and what went into that process. And I think a great example is what's happened to Reddit between our BTC and our Bitcoin. And for me, that was a learning in terms of understanding how brittle some of the communication platforms are around coordination. And yes, the communication platforms shift, but it's hard for, and so in the shifting, the core team is able to remain in sync. But I think it's hard for new people coming to the space, of which the vast majority is in front of us if crypto is to go mainstream. It's hard for people coming to the space now in 2019 to know where do I go to get the ledger of record on everything that's happened with the network. And so Decred is really planned out from day one of being able to have that history. So I think that's a super important component that will benefit it more and more and more.
Yeah, I think over the last several minutes, you both alluded to various ways that you're evaluating the success of the project. How would you look at what's important? I think Alex, you alluded to paying attention to various ecosystem developments. Oh, but then Chris, it seems like you were also alluding to network participation. So I think there's obviously many ways that one can evaluate success. What metrics are you guys looking at to determine how things are going?
Sure. So I think you can break it into the supply side and the demand side. So supply side would be, like I was saying earlier, the miners, the stakers, and the developers. Miners, we have ASICs coming online. Right now for Decred is kind of like what 2013 was for Bitcoin, where you just have hash rate going through the roof. I believe hash rate is up over 100x over the last year, and that's in a down market. Staking, prices of tickets are up about 40% year over year. Some of that is inflation-based, but it's the price appreciation of tickets has outpaced inflation. So it means people increasingly valuing the ability to govern Decred as a network and also the yield of earning new DCR in that process. In terms of the, and then you have 48% of DCR outstanding is staked. And then on the developer side, there's a great publication comes out every month, Decred Journal, that outlines everything that's going on with Decred. And I think if you stay abreast of that, you'll see how active the development is on Decred. Their roadmap is public as well, with things like Lightning Network and privacy. In terms of the demand side, I think the demand side is the question mark still for Decred. And I think the demand side is question mark for a lot of crypto. There are different ways, depending on the asset, of what that demand side could be. I think for something like Decred or Bitcoin or these assets that are disinflationary going on deflationary, the benefit from spending has to outweigh the psychological cost of foregoing potential gains. And so it needs to be better than buying a cup of coffee. And this is where I don't know, there's potentially options like extending Politeia and still anchoring into Decred as a proof of work chain. And so then Decred becomes a governance chain. I think there are really interesting things to be done potentially with DCR time, which is Decred's timestamping. But the way we approach the demand side is we openly acknowledge it's an open question, but they have constructed a supply side with sustainability and adaptability such that we have conviction they will be around long enough to find killer applications and to bring on that demand side.
A really critical component of the demand side, as you mentioned, and I agree with the way that you set that out, is liquidity. So this event hopefully being one of many where we see fiat pairs for Decred, where we see other crypto pairs for Decred, where we see Decred listed and allowing consumers to access it. And Chris, you've been doing a lot of fantastic work around bootstrapping liquidity, working with service providers and so forth. Like, I view those as prerequisites to getting the demand side on board. It needs to be easy for people to access the asset in order to use it. So maybe you can talk about some of that.
Sure. It's one of the things we do at Placeholder is helping teams build out market infrastructure. We believe teams should be focused on the technology. And actually, we, as a venture firm that specializes in crypto, get economies of scale in knowing all of the custodians, knowing all of the exchanges, and being able to help our teams build those relationships and those integrations in a way that's much more efficient because it's what we specialize in doing, whereas a team has to do it 0 to 60 all on their own each time that they want to do it. So that's been a big part of what we've been working on with Decred because the Decred team has been focused pretty much solely on the technology. And that's why a lot of people just haven't heard about Decred and are surprised at the merits of the project when they do go deeper into it. I think so. That's say on the market infrastructure side. I think another potential demand driver in the next cycle will be people seeing Decred as a great alternative store of value to Bitcoin with its hyper-secure, adaptable, and sustainable properties. And this is where I understand the Bitcoin, say, minimalist or maximalist contingent that believe you should only hold Bitcoin. And I understand that worldview, and I've read the Bitcoin Standard. But I think that most investors, institutional investors that you end up talking with, or just your casual retail investors, are not comfortable with sole exposure to a single asset. And so finding alternative assets that are targeting similar visions in slightly different ways, I think becomes a short to medium term demand driver for Decred that sets it up for the longer term demand sides.
So great. Both Chris, you and Alex touched on liquidity and how exchanges can fit into the roadmap and the ultimate success of Decred. I think this is what the foundation of a healthy partnership might look like. Maybe would you be able to expand on the possible benefits of having a fiat pair available?
Sure. So I think fiat pairs are really important for crypto assets because it's an exogenous source of capital. And so if you're only quoted in crypto pairs, primarily being BTC and ETH, then you're really beholden to what's going on with those assets. And if value is draining out of those assets, then it's also going to be draining out of your asset. And so it's very helpful, I think, to have fiat pairs, particularly in bear markets, to just provide a steady flow of exogenous capital into the network. So I'm super happy that OKCoin is going to be providing a fiat pair to Decred. Decred definitely needs more fiat pairs. And then, liquidity broadly is an interesting question because generally, yes, you want these assets to be more liquid and so that there's not a lot of slippage if someone comes in. I think we have a lot of conversations internally about what is the liquidity profile necessary for different kinds of assets, because not every crypto asset is equal. And for governance crypto assets, maybe having some amount of illiquidity is actually a feature and not a bug, in that it makes it harder to amass a large amount of the asset, which is just another speed bump to trying to attack the network through amassing the asset. It's a half-baked thought, but I think there is something to not every crypto asset needs the exact same liquidity profile.
Okay, great. And as you folks are well aware, we will be listing Decred later on in the week. I think if you're familiar with OKCoin, if you've been following us for the last several weeks and months, we're very careful to select projects that we think are quality, that will benefit from additional liquidity, whose inclusion in our network and whose availability to our community will actually be positive for crypto development. And so we're excited. We're excited for this. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for speaking to these wonderful folks.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
My name is Elaine. I lead our token listing initiative. So I'm really excited to see you all here. Really happy to have Decred join our platform. I'm really looking forward to kind of what the next years will look like in our partnership. So thank you all again for coming and joining us for this. I know we are running a bit behind. I'm sure you guys are eyeing the food and maybe drink refills, but I did want to open the floor to any questions, if anyone has any for any of our speakers. Yes. And if you could just, here, you know what, let's try with the mics. And then if you could just let us know who you're directing your question to.
So I guess mostly Placeholder, but also Decred. I know there's been a lot of kind of hostile activity within kind of the Ethereum ecosystem recently, especially with Afri, the hard fork coordinator, kind of leaving the Ethereum ecosystem related to kind of just like related conflicts of interest, where basically kind of he on Twitter he was talking about Polkadot, and people thought that his kind of motives for delaying a lot of the hard fork development was for like Polkadot to kind of come in as a kind of competitor and kind of take over the mindshare developers and so forth. So I guess this is a very much a kind of like political question which relates to governance, but how does, I guess, Placeholder as a large token holder of Decred take into account like potential conflicts of interest related to politicking, as well as kind of voting for things that may be kind of in competing with Decred and other sort of projects like that?
Sure. Great question. So first to the Ethereum point, and then to Decred. Every crypto network is going to have to make hard decisions. And so it's a matter of being purposeful about the way in which the decisions are made. And if you're not going to put in place a framework for making decisions, then that is a decision in and of itself. And the stakes of these processes only go up as the network value scales. And that's why, for example, if you look at Bitcoin early on, there were some instances where miners moved really fast. But that was when Bitcoin was much smaller. And I think we're starting to see similar things with Ethereum, where as Ethereum scales and the stakes grow and there's not formal mechanisms around governance, there are these really vicious debates that happen. And so this is where actually with Ethereum we're seeing things like Moloch DAO, and we're seeing, say, secondary layers of governance bolted on to try and provide that consistency in governance. So I think that most networks are going to end up converging on, say, formal governance frameworks. I think Bitcoin might be the exception, and it might be, given its particular properties, able to get away with that. And I'm bullish on Bitcoin. to be clear about that. I think in terms of Decred, my partner Joel has a line where he'll say off-chain diplomacy but on-chain governance. And off-chain diplomacy does happen. That is a function of human nature. And there's Phil Dyan, who's done some great work on dark DAOs and vote buying, and I think a lot of these things are we're going to learn the hard way. There are going to be some massive failures, I just look at how much we learned from the DAO within Ethereum and actually how much activity that later ended up kicking off. So we always learn from the massive failures. I think that what's important with Decred is that, yes, there will be off-chain diplomacy, but the on-chain mechanics and how things are set up and how things are going to work are clear to everyone from the beginning, and so there's no dispute around those mechanisms.
So you talked about Decred being like some sort of a governance layer. What exactly does that look like in your mind? That doesn't really make sense to me.
Well, I mean, in terms of governance layer, governance is really about making decisions for a collective group. If there's a large number of people, governance is going, well, should we have universal health care or should we let everybody, I don't know, poop in the street? And people who live here are intimately familiar with the second option. And governance really comes down to things like this, making group decisions that are difficult, like nobody wants to scoop up the poop. Who's going to do that? These are the kind. So to me, governance is really just the process of making decisions for a group in a at least nominally reasonable way.
And I think the question was around potentially extending Politeia.
Sure, extending Politeia, like what is the scope of governance? You see that like Decred replacing a country's governance, like governing for other tokens, like.
So I think a lot of, say, the more intricate governance mechanisms will come in the application interface layer. Decred is a pretty simple machinery for voting, money, and transparency. I guess conversations, voting, money, and transparency around that process. And so that machinery, and this is what we're going to see just across the board with protocols versus application interfaces. The protocol should remain, as thin as possible to enable all of the core functionalities, while the application interface will customize things for the end user. And so, could this be used for a nation state? Potentially. That's a really big application interface to build, but I think the core tenets of the machinery are there.
I think where you start. So where you start, I think, with that is Decred right now is working on Decred governance problems, right? So Politeia is about solving a problem for Decred. Maybe at some point in the future, solving that problem for Decred means somebody else can say, well, I can use that for my application and so forth. But I don't think it's really, and Jake, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't sound like Decred would be wise right now to first figure out everybody else's governance problems. Right? That seems like a full-time job, right?
City clean, right? Keep that tight, and then we can sort of talk about sort of extending the model in other contexts.
And maybe we'll do one last question. Yeah.
So the at least three dominant crypto narratives right now, the sound money, DeFi, and then Web3, which is essentially non-financial use cases where you're connecting supply and demand and doing disintermediation. I just wanted to get your take on, especially the guys from Placeholder, on how do you see DeFi in the next 3 to 5 years? Is it on solid ground? Do you think there's a real opportunity or there's too much hype? And the same thing on Web3 as well. We've had a lot of protocols, like Origin is a good example, trying to connect supply and demand in non-financial use cases. But when we talk about things like decentralized Uber and decentralized Airbnb, are these even realistic? And how do you see that evolving over the next few years?
So I think DeFi is much more short to medium term thing to be bullish on than Web3. I think Web3 is a longer term vision, and a lot of it is contingent upon us nailing a bunch of these financial components. And I think that, actually in the short to medium term, a lot of, say, pragmatic approaches where there's some centralized concessions are going to take place, a lot of vertical integration to allow speed to market. We're going to learn a lot from those. And then say the final vision of small pieces loosely joined materializes over the next couple of decades. And that's really, the small pieces loosely joined vision is because in order to build off of a small pieces loosely joined infrastructure, you need all of those independent pieces to come together. And we're seeing lots of them come together now, but they're still in their infancy. So I think that, the proximate bull market, one of the main narratives where people will see utility and people will get excited and, yes, overshoot inevitably will be the DeFi space. And then, we'll get another crash. And maybe in that proximate crash is really where we start to see more Web3 things gaining actual utility and adoption there, and sets up for another cycle.
Great.
I did. No. No. Well, you mentioned at the end of your question about things like decentralized Uber, decentralized Airbnb. I think that something to keep in mind from an engineering perspective is that it's very easy to talk about decentralizing these certain complex things like staying in somebody's house or riding in someone's car, but what you'll notice about things like, say, proof of work and proof of stake is that they keep it intentionally simple. And so by keeping it simple, you can create a game that's fair and iterate it and then derive a benefit from it. The more complex a piece of infrastructure is that you're trying to replace, the harder it is to gamify it, right? Like how are you going to turn Airbnb into a game? I mean, hate to circle back to keeping the city clean, but there you go, right?
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know you guys have lots of questions, so I think you guys will be staying, having